you're not living. You're performing. Every move, every word, every pause, calculated. You don't just live your life anymore, you watch yourself living it. Like a director watching a scene unfold, like a product reviewing itself in real time. There's a gap now between who you are and who you think you should appear to be. Even your silence is curated. Even your authenticity is an act. You dress like you're not trying. You post like you don't care, but everything is rehearsed, scripted, framed, filtered. You weren't born to perform, but now you don't know how to stop, because if you drop the act, what's left? You don't share to connect. You share to exist. In a world flooded with noise, silence feels like death. So you speak, even when you have nothing to say. You smile into the void, curate your vulnerability, and perform closeness like a script. Not because you're fake, but because that's what we were taught to do. Be seen to be real, be liked to feel loved, be visible or disappear. Social media didn't create this. It amplified it. Like a mirror with no glass, just reflection. Endless, repetitive, addictive. You start with control, a profile, a filter, a caption. Then it flips. The performance takes over. And suddenly, you're waking up every day to keep a character alive. You become hyper-aware of angles, of lighting, of timing, of how real your realness will look, of how natural your spontaneity will seem. It's a strange kind of prison, built not with walls, but with validation. You trap yourself in who you think they want you to be. The likes feel warm, the silence feels cold, so you keep showing up. Not because it's you, but because you've built a version of yourself that can't survive being forgotten. We used to ask, who am I? Now we ask, who do they see? Do they still see me? But what if this performance, this curated life, this relentless self-monitoring is the very thing keeping you from being? Not just online, but in life, in your own skin, in your breath, in your silence. The more you act, the less you feel. The more you frame, the less you live. The more you chase attention, the further you drift from yourself. And the scariest part? You're applauded for it, rewarded, celebrated for forgetting who you are. Because the show must go on, even if it kills what's real in you. There was a time when life was something you lived. Now it's something you present. You used to look at the world. Now you look at yourself, looking at the world. And you ask, how does this moment look to them? Welcome to the society of the spectacle. Guy Debord saw it coming long before we had smartphones in our pockets, before we were influencers, before we became content. He wrote, "Everything that was directly lived has receded into a representation." That's it. That's the wound. You don't live to feel anymore. You live to show. You don't go to the beach to feel the waves. You go to post that you felt them. You don't cry to release pain. You cry with your camera on. You don't discover something and let it transform you. You summarize it in a caption and move on. You've become the witness of your own existence, but not the kind of witness that listens, the kind that edits, that frames, that approves or deletes. You're no longer the subject of your life. You're the object, a visual product, an aesthetic project, a performance optimized for metrics. Debord called this the spectacle,
a system in which life itself is replaced by its image, where reality is consumed as appearance, where presence is irrelevant, and only perception matters. The spectacle is not a collection of images, he wrote, but a social relation among people mediated by images. That's what changed everything. We don't interact with each other anymore. We interact through images, through projections, through virtual masks. Even in our most private moments, we're half thinking, could this be a story? Could this be content? The spectacle doesn't ask you to be real. It asks you to appear real. It rewards not truth, but presentation. Not depth, but aesthetics of depth. It doesn't matter if you're broken, as long as your brokenness looks beautiful. And so you turn your trauma into templates, your healing into highlights, your grief into good lighting. Not because you're manipulative, but because you've been conditioned to survive like this, to exist through attention, to be relevant or be erased. And over time, the line between your life and your image dissolves. You forget what silence felt like before it became uncomfortable. You forget what solitude was before it became suspicious. You forget what presence meant before it became something to document. You don't just post anymore. You post yourself, your face, your opinions, your routines, your wounds, your joy, your identity, your worth. And every post becomes a little brick in the house of the image you're building and now imprisoned in. In the world that is really upside down, Debord said, the true is a moment of the false. And this is what makes it dangerous. The spectacle doesn't look fake. It looks beautiful, desirable. It gives you a stage, a following, a purpose, but it takes something subtle in return. Your presence, your interior life, your ability to be without being watched. You've become the image, and the image is always on.
You don't have an inner world. You have a feed. Your emotions, public. Your thoughts, externalized. Your value, measured in impressions, reach, and response. But where do you live now? Where do you exist when the screen goes dark? Byung-Chul called this the era of the transparency society. A world where nothing is hidden, where everything, every wound, every meal, every moment of solitude is expected to be exposed, explained, shared. In the society of transparency, he writes, everything is made visible, and in that visibility, everything becomes controllable. You're not free. You're hyper-visible. You're constantly self-surveilling, anticipating how your life will look before you even live it. Privacy isn't just gone, it's unwanted. We've been trained to see silence as suspicious, inwardness as weakness, mystery as a threat. So we choose exposure, not because we want to, but because we fear the alternative. To be unseen, unread, unknown. But something ancient dies in this process, something sacred. We lose the ability to return to ourselves, to sit in stillness, to let a thought be a thought, not a post, to let a feeling move through us without turning it into performance. Han says this erosion of the inner life leads to psychopolitical burnout. Not the kind of exhaustion you feel in your body, but the kind that lives in your soul. You stop being with yourself. You start outsourcing your being to notifications, to comments, to reactions that validate you just enough to keep going, but never enough to truly arrive. And it's not just emotional. It's structural.
We used to define ourselves from the inside out. Now, we build identities from the outside in, from aesthetics, from alignment, from algorithms. The compulsion of positivity leads to a new kind of violence, the violence of sameness. You don't even notice it, but you're slowly losing your edges, your contradictions, your shadow, the parts of you that don't look good under LED light, the parts of you that are real. And here lies the most dangerous illusion, that being seen is the same as being known, that exposure equals connection, that presence on a platform equals presence in your own body. But exposure is not intimacy. Visibility is not vulnerability, and performance is not presence. You start to wither, not from lack of attention, but from lack of inner contact. You forget how to be in your own skin without adjusting it for the camera. You forget how to be with your own thoughts without editing them for clarity. You forget how to be alone without performing aloneness. This is what Han calls the violence of overexposure, a silent violence, one that doesn't bleed, one that looks normal. But you feel it, as a dull ache in your chest when you're alone with no one watching, as the panic that rises when the notifications stop, as the emptiness that swells when the mirror is gone and you don't know who's left. You've become public property, and your interior world, once a place of mystery, chaos, and growth, has turned into a showroom, clean, curated, exhausted. Because in this world, you're not allowed to be unfinished, not allowed to be invisible, not allowed to be in process. You're expected to be a product, a brand, a presence. And presence was never meant to be sold.
You don't feel like yourself, but you're not sure who yourself even is anymore. There's a numbness in you. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant. Like a fog you've learned to live inside. This is not just fatigue, it's something deeper, a kind of erosion. A slow-burning dissociation from your own identity. You perform so much that you forget what it feels like to simply be, to act without calculating, to speak without packaging, to exist without approval. You're split between who you are and who you need to be in order to be accepted. This is ego fatigue. The exhaustion of maintaining an image, day after day, in a world where attention is currency and disappearance is death. You don't collapse, you don't scream, you just drift, smiling, showing up, producing, while quietly dying inside. Psychologists call this self-alienation, the gradual loss of connection with your authentic feelings, values, desires. The slow separation between your inner world and the role you've built to survive. And the worst part? No one sees it, because from the outside, you're doing fine. Your highlights are beautiful. Your captions are inspiring. Your presence is consistent. But inside, you feel like a ghost, haunting the life you're performing. This is burnout of the self. Not because you're working too much, but because you're performing too constantly. There's no pause, no sacred space, no room to fall apart without witnesses. You even feel guilty for resting, because rest means invisibility, and invisibility feels like death. So you keep moving. Not because you're inspired, but because you're afraid of what will surface if you ever stop. The anxiety? It's not random. It's the voice of everything you've been suppressing in the name of
being okay. The depression? It's not laziness. It's the weight of carrying a version of you that no longer fits. The emptiness? It's not weakness. It's the cost of replacing real connection with performance-based validation. You start craving extremes, stimulation, noise, anything to distract you from the quiet ache of not being present in your own life. And slowly, you start to notice other symptoms. You can't sit still in silence. You check your phone like it holds your identity. You feel more yourself in stories than in real conversations. You're constantly performing wellness while internally collapsing. This is the dark irony of it all. You chase attention to feel alive and end up more disconnected than ever. Because attention isn't intimacy. Visibility isn't presence. Engagement isn't love. And yet you're surrounded by these metrics. Every platform reminds you that your existence can be measured. Every post feels like a test. Am I enough today? Did they see me? Did they care? It's not just draining, it's dehumanizing. You are not a soul anymore. You are a brand, a timeline, a series of impressions that must be optimized or forgotten. And in this constant performance, you begin to forget what's real, what joy felt like before it needed a caption, what love felt like before it became content, what pain felt like before it needed to be explained. This is not just mental health. This is about identity collapse, about losing the thread that ties you back to something true, something unshareable, something sacred. But how do you recover something you've never been taught to value? How do you come home to yourself when you've spent your whole life leaving?
There was a time you didn't need to be anything. You just were. Present. Imperfect. Whole. But that time feels distant now. Like a dream you can't quite remember but still ache for. You've become so many things for so many people, you don't know who you became for yourself. You built a self, like a stage, ascetic, articulate, admired, but empty. You smile, but it's tight, controlled. A smile that knows its angle, that lives for the frame. You speak, but only in ways that won't disturb, won't alienate, won't cost you belonging. You feel, but only enough to be relatable, not enough to be real. And somewhere in all this performance, you disappeared. Not dramatically, not loudly. You just slowly faded into a version of yourself that could be tolerated, liked, shared. You adjusted your tone. You polished your chaos. You dressed up your pain so it wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. And now? You don't know what your real voice sounds like without the need to be understood. You don't know what your body feels like without the camera watching. You don't know what your truth is when no one is there to clap for it. You've confused attention for love, relevance for connection, identity for brand. And maybe it worked. Maybe people adore the version of you that performs so well, that never cracks, that always knows what to say. But at night, when it's quiet, when the performance ends, you feel it. The ache, the emptiness, the echo of someone you lost but never buried. That someone was you. The you before the act, before the edits, before the applause, before the need to survive by being seen. You've been performing for so long, you forgot how to be human. Not optimized, not impressive, not digestible. Just human, messy, tender,
incomplete. And maybe that's what hurts the most. Not that you changed, but in changing, you abandoned parts of yourself that were still trying to breathe. You don't remember who you are, but you remember that you forgot. And that is the wound.
This is not an attack, not a rejection of technology, not a rant against social media, not a nostalgic cry for a world that no longer exists. This is something quieter, deeper, more dangerous. This is a mirror, held up to the version of you that was built to be seen, but never to feel. You weren't taught to lie, you were taught to survive. And in a world where being real doesn't pay, you adapted. You performed to be loved. You presented to be safe. You stayed visible to not disappear. Debord saw it clearly. The more powerful the spectacle becomes, the more it escapes people's understanding. And you feel that, don't you? This growing sense that something's wrong, but you can't name it, can't trace it, can't undo it. Because the performance has no off switch. The audience is always watching, even when it's just you watching yourself. Byung-Chul said, "The society of positivity no longer allows the other. It abolishes the secret, dissolves the distance, and extinguishes the shadows." And what are you without your shadows? What are you when no one is looking? Do you know? Do you remember? This mirror doesn't show you your flaws. It shows you your fragmentation, the cracks between your soul and your signal, the space between your performance and your presence. It shows you a version of yourself that's brilliant at pretending and terrified of pausing. A version that's liked, followed, applauded, but unknown, even to you. And maybe that's why you're tired, not just from doing too much, but from being too little of yourself for too long. Because you weren't born to edit your existence. You weren't meant to narrate your life in real time. You were meant to live, to feel, to fall apart in silence, to break without documenting it, to exist without explanation. And maybe you don't need to delete your profile. Maybe you just need to remember that behind every screen is a soul, and behind every performance is a pain waiting to be witnessed, not by others, but by you. You were never the product. You were the presence, buried beneath performance, longing to return. So no, this is not a critique. It's a mirror, one that reflects the truth you already knew, but couldn't say out loud. You're not living, you're performing, and part of you is begging to stop. If this moved something inside you, stay. We're building something for those who don't fake it. Subscribe, not just for the content, but for the confrontation. And if this left a wound, maybe it was meant to. Sometimes the best way to go deeper is to share the pain. Share it. Someone out there doesn't even know they're performing. They think it's just life, just how it is, just how they are. But something's cracking. Something's tired. Something inside them is begging for silence, for presence, for something real again. This won't stop the noise, but it might plant a pause, a fracture, a breath.